close your eyes and relax. Milo will take you on a quiet night walk through an English medieval castle. Tonight, you arrive at the castle at the hour when the last of the daylight has almost withdrawn from the sky, and the shape of the world begins to soften into shadow. The fields behind you are fading into a dim wash of gray and blue, and ahead of you, rising from the earth like something older than the memory of the road itself, stands an English medieval castle, dark against the evening air, its towers and walls holding the final light on their upper edges, while the lower stones have already sunk into night. You do not enter at once. You pause for a moment on the road and simply look at it. At this distance, the castle does not seem alive in the way a town does, with its open windows and constant movement. It seems still, self-contained, watchful. And yet, as your eyes adjust, you begin to notice the smaller signs that life continues within those walls. A thread of smoke rises from somewhere inside and drifts sideways in the cooling air. A light glows briefly, then disappears behind a narrow opening. You hear, carried faintly across the darkening ground, the bark of a dog, the clink of metal, and what may be the sound of a gate beam being lowered into place for the night. This is not the bright, welcoming night of the modern world. There are no lantern-lined streets here, no warm windows glowing from every side, no easy flood of light to push back the dark. In the medieval world, night is something weightier than that. It comes fully. It fills the roads, the fields, the woods, the ditches, and the open country between one place of shelter and the next. When the sun goes down, the world does not remain available to you in the same way. It closes. And so, a castle at night is not only a home and not only a fortress, it is also a kind of island, a place cut off from the darkness around it by walls, by watchfulness, by custom, by hierarchy, and by the countless ordinary routines that make survival possible after sunset. Tonight, you will pass slowly through that island. You will approach the gate as the last workers finish their tasks. You will cross into the outer spaces where animals shift in their stalls and servants hurry through the cold with their final burdens of the day. You will step into the kitchens after supper, where heat still lingers in the stones and ash still glows beneath the great hearths. You will enter the hall as the evening quiet settles over the place where the household has eaten, spoken, judged, waited, and watched. You will climb the narrow stairs worn hollow by generations of feet. You will stand in chambers where curtains are drawn around beds to hold in what little warmth they can. You will pass through the sleeping castle, hearing the small sounds that remain when most voices have gone still. And as you walk, you will begin to understand what night in an English medieval castle was really like. Not the night of battle horns and dramatic alarms, though those things could happen. Not the night of fairy tales, where every corridor conceals a secret and every tower window frames some impossible romance. But the real night, the ordinary night, the night most people knew, a night of smoke and prayer, of wind at the walls, of tired bodies, of cold stone, of half-darkness, of animals breathing in their stalls, of old wood settling, of guards listening into the black countryside beyond the battlements, of servants sleeping close to the places where they worked, of noble households trying, with curtains and blankets and embers and habit, to make a stone fortress feel like a place of rest. It is easy, from a modern distance, to imagine a castle only in the broadest outlines. Walls, towers, a hall, perhaps a great fire, perhaps a feast. But a real castle, especially at night, was made not only of its architecture, but of its textures, the roughness of stone under the hand, the softness of rushes underfoot, though they are never quite clean, the smell of damp wool drying too slowly, the lingering smoke caught in timber beams, the sour trace of ale, the sweetness of hay, the animal warmth of horses, the faint waxy scent of candles burning low in a private chamber, the colder smell of a chapel where stone, ash, and incense seem to rest together in the same silent air. It was also made of sounds. The medieval night was not silent. Not truly. Silence, in the way many people imagine it, belongs more to imagination than to history. In a castle after dark, there is always something. The wind touching arrow slits and parapets, a chain moving slightly as a horse turns in its stall, a sleeper coughing in another room, a servant's step in a passage, the crackle of a fire that has not yet gone out, the sudden bark of a dog in the yard below, the murmur of a prayer spoken before sleep, the creak of a bed rope, the drip of water somewhere in the deep stone of the place. And underneath all of it, perhaps the most important sound of all, the sound of many lives gathered within one defended space, each resting differently according to rank, duty, age, and fortune. Because the night was not the same for everyone inside the castle. For the lord and lady, there might be a private chamber, a curtained bed, thick blankets, perhaps a brazier or a fireplace if the room allowed it, and servants nearby to assist with the rituals of sleeping and waking. For honored guests, there might be comfort enough, though even the best lodging of the medieval world would seem drafty and uncertain to modern senses. For lesser retainers, clerks, men-at-arms, and attendants, there might be shared chambers, pallets, truckle beds, benches, heaps of straw, cloaks used as blankets, sleep taken in closeness and in compromise. For servants, there was often even less. Many slept near the places where they worked, ready to rise before dawn and begin again. And then there were the guards, who did not simply sleep through the night at all. Even in peace, a castle remained alert to the darkness beyond its walls. Gates had to be secured, watches had to be kept, fires had to be tended carefully, animals needed attention, the sick might wake, children might cry, messengers might arrive late, rain might leak where it should not. The routines of the household narrowed after dark, but they did not vanish. A castle never truly slept as one body. It rested in layers. Perhaps that is the truest way to think of it. A castle at night was a layered thing. On the outermost edge, the walls, towers, and gatehouse kept their stony vigil against the dark countryside. Within them, the yards and service spaces slowly quieted after the labor of the day. Deeper inside, the hall lost its public energy and settled into ember light and shadow. Above and beyond, private chambers gathered their little islands of candlelight and whispered conversation before surrendering, one by one, to darkness. Somewhere below, in the kitchens, ashes dimmed. Somewhere above, on the walls, a watchman turned his cloak tighter against the wind. Somewhere in the stable, a horse stamped once, then went still again. And all of it happened under a night sky that people of the medieval world knew far better than most of us do now. When you stand outside this castle and look upward, the sky above it is not pale with distant electric glow. It is deep and immense. The first stars are appearing now, one by one, above the highest tower. Soon they will multiply until the whole vault of heaven seems scattered with cold fire. The moon, if it is out, will matter. Its light will matter. A clear night and a clouded one are different worlds. A windy night and a still one are different worlds. Winter darkness and summer darkness are different worlds. Medieval people felt these differences closely because they had to. Their nights were not sealed away behind glass, insulation, and switch-lit certainty. Night touched them directly, and yet for all that exposure, for all that discomfort, people did not spend every evening in terror of the dark. Night was ordinary to them in ways it can be hard for us to imagine. It brought difficulty, yes, but also order. Certain prayers belonged to evening. Certain duties belonged to evening. Certain quiets belonged only to the hours after the last meal, when the noise of the household had diminished and the world inside the walls seemed to draw inward. Night was feared in some contexts, respected in others, and simply endured in many more. It was part of life, just as the cold was part of winter, and smoke was part of fire. So as you stand here now, with the castle before you and the road dim behind you, you are not preparing to enter a place of constant drama. You are preparing to enter a place of habit. That is what makes this journey interesting. The real medieval castle was not only made of extraordinary events, it was made of repetitive ones: the drawing of bolts, the banking of fires, the carrying of water, the saying of prayers, the rubbing down of horses, the folding of garments, the checking of stores, the settling of children, the changing of the watch, the extinguishing of candles one by one. If you want to know what nights were really like here, you must pay attention to those smaller things. The grand stone shell of the castle matters, certainly. But the life inside it was built from countless human motions, most of them quiet, many of them tired, and nearly all of them repeated more nights than anyone could count. And now, as the last band of light fades beyond the fields and the air grows colder around your hands, it is time to begin. The road leads onward. The dark mass of the castle waits ahead. Somewhere beyond the gatehouse, supper has ended, fires are being managed, and the household is settling into its familiar order of sleep, watch, prayer, and labor. You take a slow step forward and make your way toward the castle. The road beneath your feet is uneven now, more track than road, its surface marked by the passing of carts, horses, boots, and weather. In daylight, you would see every rut clearly, every patch of churned mud, every stone pressed into the earth by countless journeys before your own. But in this fading hour, the ground is less precise. You feel it more than you see it. The path dips slightly, then rises again, and each careful step reminds you that a traveler in the medieval world had to know the land not only by sight, but by habit, memory, and the feel of it underfoot. Ahead, the castle grows larger with each moment. From far away, it seemed almost like part of the horizon itself, a dark interruption in the natural line of the land. But now, its shape separates into its true forms. You begin to distinguish the tower from the curtain wall, the gatehouse from the rest of the mass, the sharper angles of parapets against the softer fading sky. The upper stones still hold a trace of pale evening light, while the lower portions are already swallowed by shadow, as though the earth is slowly reclaiming them for the night. Around you, the open countryside is changing character. The fields that would have seemed broad and knowable by day now feel larger, emptier, less certain. Hedges darken into long, irregular bands. Trees lose their individual branches and become quiet blocks of shadow. A ditch beside the road, harmless enough in full light, now appears suddenly deeper, its line harder to judge. The world is not gone, but it is withdrawing from easy understanding. This is one of the first truths of the medieval night. Distance becomes uncertain. Shapes become suggestive rather than clear. Familiar ground asks for greater care. And so the castle ahead offers more than shelter. It offers definition. Within its walls, boundaries are fixed. Paths are known. Doors close. Fires burn. Routines take hold. Outside, the darkness spreads across field and track, without regard for your comfort. Inside, however imperfectly, people have pushed back against it. You continue forward, and now you begin to notice others on the road or near it, each moving with the slightly quickened purpose that comes when the day is almost done, and night is close enough to feel in the skin. A man ahead of you leads a tired horse by the bridle, speaking softly to it as it lowers its head and snorts at the cooling air. A little farther off, near a hedgerow, two figures carrying bundles move toward the castle at a pace that is not hurried enough to draw attention, but is certainly not slow. They know what it means to be outside after full dark. Whether they are servants returning from a nearby task, laborers bringing in something needed before morning, or villagers with some small obligation yet unfinished, they are all drawn in the same direction now, toward enclosure, toward firelight, toward the habits of night. From somewhere high above the gatehouse, though still too far for you to see clearly, comes the faint call of a watchman. The words do not quite reach you, only the shape of a voice carried by air. But the effect is unmistakable. The castle is aware of the road. It is already shifting into its nighttime state. Those within are taking account of who is near, who is expected, who must still be admitted before the entrance is secured. This is worth pausing over, because the evening approach to a castle was not merely picturesque. It was practical, administrative, and sometimes tense. Arrival after sunset could be inconvenient at best and suspicious at worst. In a world where messages traveled slowly, identities were often confirmed by recognition, and danger could come in ordinary forms. A late arrival always mattered. Even in peaceful times, the gate was not simply left open in a casual way. It was watched, judged, managed. You imagine what it would mean to come here in worsening weather, or in the full dark, with the road nearly invisible underfoot. You imagine the relief of seeing the gatehouse ahead, but also the uncertainty of how you might be received. Are you known, expected, trustworthy? Are the guards tired, irritable, alert? Has some rumor recently passed through the region of theft, unrest, or armed men on the move? In the medieval world, context mattered intensely. A journey's final 100 yards might feel longer than the miles behind it. The air is cooler now. You feel it most along your hands and face, and in the faint dampness that rises from the ground. Somewhere nearby, perhaps in a low field or a watercourse beyond the road, the smell of wet earth gathers more strongly as the temperature drops. Above it comes another scent, thinner but distinct. Wood smoke from within the castle precinct. Not the sweet smoke of some decorative fire, but the ordinary breath of a household winding down after the evening meal. Hearths, kitchens, perhaps a chamber fire, perhaps a servant burning off scraps of wood too small to store. That smell reaches you before the warmth does, before the walls do, before any welcome does, and like many smells, it carries information. People are inside, fires are active, life is underway according to plan. The castle is not asleep yet. It is in transition. You walk on. The closer you draw, the more the sounds begin to separate themselves from the general hush of the evening. At first it was all one distant murmur, but now you hear them as individual notes. The brief ring of metal on metal, perhaps from a chain, a buckle, or some tool being put away. A horse stamping once on timber or packed earth. The bark of a dog, sharper now than before, then another in answer. a wooden wheel creaking under slow strain, a door closing heavily somewhere inside the outer works. The sounds are not constant, and that is what makes them vivid. Each one rises for a moment into the cooling air, then settles back into the larger quiet. It is an old quiet, this kind of evening quiet, not absence, but reduction. The day is not fully over, but its noise has thinned. The broad clatter of work has narrowed into final tasks. This narrowing gives the whole approach a peculiar intimacy. A castle by day may overwhelm with movement, rank, labor, delivery, command, and business. But a castle approached at dusk begins to reveal itself differently, not as a machine at full operation, but as a body settling into its night rhythms. Now the land itself starts to guide you more decisively. The road bends slightly, whether by design or by old use shaped over generations, and the angle gives you a better view of the entrance. You can make out the gatehouse more clearly now, its opening darker than the wall around it. Above it are small apertures and defensive lines you can sense more than inspect. This is not simply a doorway. It is a controlled passage through thickness, through authority, through stone designed to measure and contain movement. Yet before you reach that threshold, there is something else that becomes visible first. Light. Not much, never as much as the modern eye expects, but enough. A lantern or torch near the entrance, a spill of firelight from some service opening, perhaps a glow from within an upper chamber slit. These little sources of light do not banish the night around the castle. They punctuate it. They make the darkness seem larger by contrast. And because they are few, they draw attention immediately. A single flame in a medieval night has more presence than a dozen lamps in a modern one. As you watch, a figure passes briefly between one of those lights and the opening behind it, and vanishes again. The movement is small, but it gives the whole place a pulse. Someone is crossing a passage. Someone is carrying something. Someone is still at work. It would be easy, from this distance, to imagine the castle as a world of nobles alone. But the approach road tells a different story. A castle was a concentration of many lives and duties. Lords might own it, command it, and symbolize its authority. But the place was sustained by grooms, cooks, porters, laundresses, guards, clerks, chaplains, stewards, stable boys, messengers, craftsmen, and countless others whose names rarely survive in records. As night falls, their labor becomes more visible in some ways, not less. You notice the final bundle being carried, the gate being checked, the animal being led in, the fire being managed, because there are fewer distractions around those acts. A short distance to one side of the track, you pass a cart that has been drawn partly off the way, perhaps to make room for others. Its shaft is tilted slightly, and something beneath a rough cloth covering catches the little remaining light. Barrels, maybe, or sacks, or split wood. The horse attached to it lowers its head and exhales in a long, warm breath. Beside it stands a boy or young man, one hand on the harness, his face difficult to read in the dusk. He does not call out. He is waiting, perhaps for instruction, perhaps for clearance, perhaps simply gathering strength for the final push toward the yard within. Everything in this hour feels slightly delayed by fatigue. That, too, is part of the truth. Evening in a medieval castle was not only atmospheric, it was bodily. People were tired, their feet hurt, their hands were rough from use, their clothes held the smells of smoke, sweat, hay, damp air, and the materials of their trade. A long day did not resolve into some idealized candlelit peace. It narrowed into practical acts performed by people whose strength had been spent and who still had a little more to do before sleep could begin. You feel the castle's scale more forcefully now. The wall ahead does not merely rise, it blocks. It interrupts the landscape with intention. Its stones are not there to harmonize with the world around them, but to master access, height, and vulnerability. From a distance, castles can look romantic because they are reduced to silhouette. Up close, they become physical again, thick, heavy, cold. Their surfaces absorb the last light unevenly. Their joints, shadows, and textures reveal age and labor. Here is stone cut, transported, shaped, and laid by hands long gone. Here is power turned into mass. And still, for all that hardness, the signs of domestic life continue to meet you. Smoke, barking, a glimmer of flame. The motion of late arrivals. The human need to be inside before darkness closes fully over the land. By now, the fields behind you matter less than the approach immediately ahead. The path narrows toward the defenses. The earth is more worn here, more traveled, more compacted by repeated use. You sense, though you do not yet fully see, that the ground before the gate will be complicated by ditch, bank, bridge, or some other outer measure designed to separate the castle from the surrounding world. That separation is important. A castle is not only a house with thick walls. It is a statement that access must be mediated. As you take the next few steps, the wind shifts. For a moment, it comes directly from the direction of the entrance, and with it arrives a fuller mixture of scents. Smoke, yes, but also stable warmth, damp timber, old straw, and that faint, sour edge of a place where many people and animals pass through enclosed spaces. It is not unpleasant exactly. It is simply alive. It tells you that the castle is not an abstract monument. It is inhabited matter. Above, the first stars have strengthened. The sky behind the upper towers is now deeper, and the stone shapes stand against it with greater clarity than the ground below. The contrast is strange and beautiful. The highest points of the castle seem almost sharper as the world grows darker, while the lower sections retreat into uncertainty. It is as if the place is descending into the night from the ground upward, while the sky preserves its outline just a little longer. This is often how memory works with old buildings too. We remember their upper shapes first, their profiles, their crowns. But life happened at the lower levels, in the passages, kitchens, yards, stairwells, doors, corners, storerooms, and chambers where people moved through routine. Tonight, your walk will move from the grand silhouette into those lived spaces. For now, though, you are still outside, still approaching, still one of the last figures on the road as the castle gathers itself for the hours ahead. The ditch or moat lies somewhere just before you now, hidden in the dimness beyond the next stretch of ground. The gatehouse waits beyond it, watchful and dark. Behind those walls, fires are being banked, beds prepared, prayers whispered, doors secured. The household is folding itself inward, and you are almost at the threshold where the open world gives way to defended space. The ground changes before you see the water. A moment ago, the road still felt like part of the open countryside, however worn and directed toward the castle it had become. But now there is a subtle difference beneath your feet and in the air around you. The earth near the outer defenses is more disturbed, more managed, more clearly made to serve the purposes of the stronghold ahead. The approach narrows. The land seems to gather itself into an edge, and just beyond that edge, where the evening has deepened into a blue-gray darkness that hides detail while preserving shape, lies the ditch. On some nights, under a brighter moon, you might see its line at once, a dark band cutting across the approach, perhaps holding still water, perhaps little more than damp shadow and steepened earth. But in this softer light, you become aware of it gradually, first through the absence of easy ground ahead, then through the faint glimmer of a surface that does not hold the fading light in the same way that stone or mud does, then through the smell. There is a coolness here that rises differently. The road behind you smelled of churned soil, hedgerow, and evening air. Here, just before the defenses, moisture gathers more strongly. You sense wet earth, standing water, reeds perhaps, mud that has held the day's dampness, and the faint vegetal scent that comes from the edges of places where land and water sit together for too long to remain entirely clean. It is not a fresh river smell. It is older than that, slower, enclosed, defensive. It is easy in the modern imagination to picture every medieval castle surrounded by a broad, gleaming moat worthy of a manuscript illumination. But the truth, as always, was more varied and more practical. Some castles had water-filled moats, some had dry ditches, some had combinations of ditch, bank, palisade, bridge, and manipulated ground that changed over time as the needs and fortunes of the place changed. The principle mattered more than the image. The land in front of the castle was not left simple. It was interrupted, broken, made awkward for anyone who approached without permission. And at night, awkwardness becomes power. Even a shallow ditch is more dangerous in darkness than it is by day. Even a narrow drop is harder to judge when the eye has lost certainty. Water reflects weak light in misleading ways. Mud shifts underfoot. A bridge feels narrower. A step that would be casual at noon becomes deliberate after sunset. This is one of the old truths of defense. Darkness improves obstacles without changing them at all. You move forward carefully now, and the bridge comes into view. It is not dramatic at first glance, not in the way that stories often want such things to be. It is simply what must exist to carry people from the outer ground to the gate beyond. Timber, perhaps, or timber laid over stone supports. Possibly the remains of a drawbridge mechanism near the gatehouse itself, depending on the castle and its design. Whatever form it takes, its meaning is unmistakable. This is the crossing point, the place where movement is funneled, slowed, seen. A faint light from near the gate catches part of its surface. Wet wood gleams more dimly than stone. The planks, if there are planks, are darkened by use, weather, and the passing of many feet. A little sheen marks where damp has settled. The edges disappear quickly into shadow. Beneath, the water or ditch is harder to read, though now and then the surface hints at itself with a low reflection that trembles and then is gone. You pause at the near side of the crossing. This is a natural place to pause. It divides one kind of space from another. Behind you is the open world, uncertain and gradually yielding to night. Ahead is the defended world, controlled not because it is gentle, but because it is bounded. The difference matters. Medieval people understood thresholds very strongly. Gates, bridges, church porches, hall doors, chamber curtains, screens passages, stair landings, all these small boundaries ordered life. They determined who might go where, under what conditions, and in whose presence. Here, at the ditch, that principle appears in one of its oldest and clearest forms. Crossing is not just movement, it is permission. The evening air flows more freely here across the open gap before the walls. You feel it touch your face, cooler now than on the road behind. From somewhere in the reeds or grasses along the damp edge comes the slight whisper of movement. In warmer seasons, there might be insects here, or frogs, or the soft life of water margins. In colder weather, there would be only the damp smell and the harder stillness of earth gone dark. Tonight, whatever the season, the impression is the same. The castle has been given a margin of difficulty before it grants you entry. As you step onto the bridge, the sound beneath your feet changes at once. That too is part of the experience. Earth muffles, timber answers back. Stone sends the step upward into itself. A bridge has its own voice in the night, often small but distinct. A hollow note under the sole, a slight creak from a beam strained by age and use, a faint shift of moisture-darkened wood. If there is a rail or side barrier, your hand might feel it rough beneath the fingers, worn by weather, perhaps slightly tacky with damp. If the bridge is broader and more solid, the sound may be less intimate, but still different from the packed road behind. Every surface in a medieval castle announced itself differently in the dark, and people learned to know places by sound as much as sight. Halfway across, you stop again and look outward. It is a brief turning of the head, but enough to remind you how quickly the open land has receded into abstraction. The road is now a darker line among other dark lines. The fields beyond are already losing their separate boundaries. A hedgerow that earlier seemed textured and knowable is now little more than a low black seam across the fading ground. Above it all, the sky has deepened further, and the stars are clearer now, cold points appearing above the rural dark. Behind you there is distance. Ahead of you there is stone. And once again, the castle changes character as you near it. From the road, it was a whole silhouette. From the ditch, it becomes a composition of surfaces and absences. The wall is larger now, less symbolic, more physical. The gatehouse opening is a darkness within darkness. The lit points around it, small as they are, begin to define the scale of the entrance. You understand more clearly how high the wall rises above the crossing, how narrow the controlled way must feel compared with the exposed ground behind you. Even the light seems changed by stone. It does not spread widely. It catches on edges, fittings, damp patches, and then gives way abruptly to shadow. Somewhere above, perhaps on the parapet, or in an upper chamber of the gatehouse, there is movement. You do not see a whole figure, only the suggestion of one passing across a dimly lit opening and then withdrawing. A guard, no doubt, or a porter, or some man on duty who has heard the approach and wishes to judge it before the traveler reaches the threshold. In this way, the crossing is never private. The bridge may feel solitary, but it is watched. And that sense of being watched was one of the great psychological powers of a castle approach after dark. In daylight, many things can be observed at once. The eye wanders, details compete. But at night, when light is scarce, the watcher and the watched are drawn into sharper relation. If someone stands above a gate with even a little better visibility than you possess on the ground below, then the imbalance is immediate. You feel yourself being received conditionally. You have entered the field of judgment. Still, there is no need to imagine this in purely hostile terms. A castle was not merely suspicious of everyone outside it. It was also responsible for receiving known people properly. Guests, servants, tenants on errands, messengers, craftsmen, clerics, and household members returning late all had to pass these same defenses. The procedure could be ordinary, even familiar. yet the structure itself ensured that familiarity never became carelessness. Night made that especially important. The bridge carries you onward, and now the sounds from within come a little more clearly. The bark of a dog no longer feels distant. You can hear the sharper edge of it now, and even the pause after, as though the animal is listening for an answer. From farther inside, perhaps from a yard or stable, comes the rustle and thud of something living shifting in enclosure. A horse, perhaps, or more than one. A murmur of voices follows, difficult to distinguish as words, but recognizably human. Low, practical, unceremonious. Someone finishing a task. Someone asking for something to be brought. Someone giving the last small instruction of the day. Then, for a brief moment, another sound rises above the rest. The short, ringing contact of metal with metal, clear in the night air and gone almost instantly. A hook, a latch, a chain being handled, a fastening being checked. In a place built around thresholds, these sounds matter. They are the punctuation of evening order. You draw nearer to the far side of the ditch now, and the shadows under the gatehouse take on greater depth. If the castle has a drawbridge section near the entrance, you can imagine the heavy practicality of it, the timber and iron, the chain or mechanism that would lift or settle its weight. Even where the actual movement is not happening before you, the possibility of movement remains present in the architecture. The crossing can be broken, the way can be denied. The bridge itself reminds you that access is conditional. The wind brings another thread of scent from within. Smoke again, but warmer now. Also old straw, horse sweat, damp wool. Maybe the faint sweetness of hay stored nearby. These are not grand smells, but intimate ones. They belong to enclosure and use. A real medieval castle did not smell like stone alone. Stone was only the frame. Life filled it with far humbler odors, especially after dark when the evening damp held them low and close. You have almost reached the end of the bridge, and with that comes a subtle emotional shift. Crossing a ditch in the dark draws the mind inward. One becomes more aware of footing, of surrounding silence, of where one body is in relation to edge and structure. But as the gate nears, another awareness replaces it. The awareness of entry, of encounter, of being very close now to the first true mouth of the castle. The ditch was a separation. The gatehouse will be a test. Yet there is something else here too. Something gentler beneath the sternness of the design. For all its defensive purpose, this crossing also promises relief. Beyond the gate there will be known ground. However hard or cold the castle may be, it offers interior space. It offers walls against the wind. It offers fire somewhere, even if not for everyone equally. It offers human arrangement against the wide uncertainty outside. Medieval people approached strongholds not only with deference, but often with bodily gratitude. To pass from road to enclosure at the end of the day was no small thing. Shelter always meant more when darkness had already begun to thicken behind you. Now you stand at the far side of the bridge, the ditch at your back, the gatehouse before you in full looming presence. The opening is deeper than it seemed from the road. The wall around it rises heavily, and the stone reveals its true mass at last. Grooves for the portcullis may already be visible in the dim light if you look carefully. The timbers of the great doors are dark, iron-bound, and substantial enough to outlast generations. Above and within, narrow spaces suggest murder holes, upper chambers, or slits for watchful eyes. This is not merely architecture. It is concentrated intention. The road has brought you here as far as it can. The open country is now behind you. The defensive margin has been crossed. Before you lies the controlled passage through which everyone must enter, whether lord, servant, guest, messenger, or stranger. And as the light flickers on damp stone, and the air beneath the gatehouse mouth feels cooler and more enclosed than the air outside, you prepare to step into the throat of the castle itself. The gatehouse rises above you with a heaviness that is felt as much as seen. From the road, it was only part of the castle's silhouette. From the bridge, it became a destination. But here, at the threshold itself, it is something else entirely. A wall made deeper, a doorway made powerful, a space designed not only to admit people, but to slow them, measure them, and remind them that entry into a medieval castle was never a casual thing. You stand for a moment before the outer doors. Even in the weak light, you can read their age in the texture of the timber. Thick planks, darkened by weather, smoke, and years of handling, are held together by bands of iron that catch the lantern glow in dull, broken highlights. The surface is not smooth. It is ridged, split here and there, swollen slightly in places by damp and time. These are doors made to endure force, not to flatter the eye. If there is a smaller postern cut into one leaf, it may stand open tonight for ordinary entry, while the great doors themselves remain ready to be barred when the last movement of the evening is done. Somewhere above you, in the chamber over the gate passage, or on the parapet above it, a guard shifts position. You hear the scrape of a boot, then a faint murmur, as if one man has spoken to another. The words do not carry clearly, but the tone does. Alert, practical, unsurprised. This is part of the nightly work. People come. People are judged. The gate is managed. One by one, those who belong within are admitted, and those who do not are delayed, questioned, or turned away. The medieval gatehouse was among the most important spaces in the castle because it combined several functions in one compact, heavily fortified place. It defended the entrance, certainly. It observed the road and bridge. It could trap or slow unwanted arrivals. But it also served the simpler business of household order. It was where arrivals were noted, where access was controlled, where the outer world met the routines of the enclosed one. At night, this mattered even more. Darkness reduced certainty. A known face was worth more after sunset than a plausible story. As you step forward, the light changes around you. Outside, however dim the evening had become, there was still the sky above and the breath of open air around the walls. Under the gatehouse arch, that openness disappears at once. Stone closes in overhead. The ceiling of the passage catches the small sounds of movement and sends them back softened. The air is cooler here, touched by damp from the masonry and by the long habit of shadow. The smell changes too. Less field, less water, more stone, timber, old straw brought in on boots, old smoke, a trace of oil or tallow from lamps, and the stale scent of enclosed passage where many people and animals have gone in and out over time. Your own footsteps sound different now. What had been absorbed by earth and then lightly answered by the bridge is now given a deeper echo. Not a grand echo, but a contained one, the sort that stays close to the body. Each step confirms the thickness of the space around you. If there is a lantern mounted on the wall, its light does not spread far. It reveals one patch of stone, one corner of timber, one iron fitting, then surrenders quickly to shadow. That is another truth of medieval lighting. It did not conquer darkness. It negotiated with it. You look upward as you move farther into the passage and notice the grooves in the stone where the portcullis runs. there is something deeply sobering about seeing them up close. From outside, one may think of a portcullis almost as an emblem, a feature belonging to castles in the broadest sense. But here, the grooves make it plain that this was a working mechanism, not a decorative idea. A heavy iron or timber lattice could drop through these channels with frightening speed and certainty. To stand beneath such a place, even in peace, is to be reminded that the architecture of the gatehouse is not neutral. It is always ready to become a weapon. And yet most of the time, for most of the people who passed through here, it was simply part of life. That is worth remembering. Castle entrances were not extraordinary to those who served or visited such places regularly. The porter knew the sound of the household's rhythms. The guards knew who returned late from errands, who had been sent to the village, who was expected from a nearby manor, who had authority to admit a guest, and who required closer questioning. The same passage that could become a killing zone in war was, in ordinary hours, also where a stable boy led in a horse after dusk, where a kitchen servant hurried through with a covered basket, where a messenger dismounted stiffly after a long ride, where a known tenant removed his cap and spoke his business, where dogs nosed at familiar boots, and where the nightly act of shutting the world out was performed with steady hands. A figure stands to one side of the passage now, half in shadow, lit only along one shoulder and cheek by the lantern near the wall. Perhaps he is the porter. Perhaps one of the gate guards. His clothing is practical, layered against the chill, and his expression is not theatrical suspicion, but the more ordinary weariness of a man who has been on duty for hours and will remain so yet a little longer. He glances at you, takes your measure in the old simple way of the eye, and either gives the brief nod of recognition or the short, guarded pause that asks for explanation. In a real castle, so much depended on this kind of human knowledge. Records mattered, rank mattered, orders mattered. But very often entry also depended on whether the man on duty knew your face, your name, your purpose, your horse, your master, your accent, or simply whether you moved like someone who belonged. The passage narrows your awareness. Outside, your attention was divided between sky, road, fields, ditch, wall, and the wider composition of the place. Here, all attention gathers around near things: stone to either side, iron-bound doors, portcullis grooves, the guard's posture, the lantern flame, the sense of depth ahead where the inner opening waits beyond the darker middle of the tunnel. Medieval architecture often does this. It alternates compression and release. The road opens, the bridge narrows, the gate passage compresses sharply. Then, if admitted, the courtyard opens again on the far side. You hear another sound above, softer this time, a murmur, then the faint shifting clink of something metallic, perhaps the chain of the portcullis mechanism, perhaps the ring of keys, perhaps gear settling as the men above move across the chamber floor. The rooms over gatehouses were not empty voids. Depending on the castle, they could house guards, stores, machinery, or small defensive positions. Even when you cannot see them, their presence makes itself felt. The gatehouse is vertically inhabited. There are eyes above your head, hands near mechanisms, men moving in spaces whose geometry you sense only through sound. This layering of unseen activity is part of what made medieval strongholds feel alive at night. Darkness hid much, but it also sharpened the imagination of structure. You knew there were chambers above because you heard life in them. You knew there were stairs leading upward because men emerged from positions that had seemed empty. You knew doors existed within the thickness of the wall because voices appeared suddenly from stone. A castle by night was always more populated than your eye could confirm. Farther in, the lantern light catches on the underside of the arch and reveals the roughness of the masonry. Stone blocks laid with tremendous labor, their surfaces slightly uneven, their edges dark where damp has gathered, hold the cold of evening deep within them. In winter, this cold would be severe. In milder weather, it would still be noticeable. Passing under the gatehouse after sunset was a bodily reminder that castles were built first for durability, not comfort. Even their most functional spaces seem to store hardness. And yet beneath that hardness, ordinary life continues to leave its marks. The lower stones near the passage edge are rubbed smoother where generations have brushed past them. Timber at shoulder height bears the polish of repeated contact. The threshold has worn slightly under the feet of men, women, children, servants, guests, grooms, clerks, priests, squires, laborers, and guards who entered here across years too numerous to picture clearly. If there is straw caught in a corner, or mud drying along the edge of the wall, or a forgotten rope peg, these are the small signs that this defensive throat is also a working corridor. The castle's severity is always being softened, not by kindness, but by use. You move farther inward now, and the outer light behind you seems already more distant than it should. That is another effect of gate passages. They distort the sense of transition. A few paces under stone, and the open world is reduced to a framed dimness at your back. Ahead, there is another framed dimness, but it is different. That one contains inner life. Not comfort for all, certainly, and not equality, but enclosure. Beyond it lie the yards, buildings, animals, smoke, voices, and routines of the castle household after dark. Before you emerge, you pause beneath the portcullis. This is perhaps the narrowest psychological point of the whole entry. If the great doors behind were shut and the grille lowered before you, you would be held in a chamber designed exactly for such control. The very idea presses on the mind, even when no danger is present. The slit of the world above, the thickness of the wall around you, the authority of those stationed overhead. There is no clearer architectural statement that access exists by leave, not by right. At the same time, there is something almost ritual about passing this point when all is well. The castle receives you in stages. First, the road offers approach. Then the ditch imposes caution. Then the bridge carries you into scrutiny. Then the gatehouse narrows you into judgment. To enter fully, you must submit to the sequence. Medieval society loved such sequences because they reflected its deepest assumptions. Order must be visible, rank must be felt, movement must be governed. A castle entrance was social thought turned into stone. A colder current of air touches you briefly from one side. Perhaps there is a small guard chamber opening into the passage. Perhaps a side door has shifted. You catch the smell of lamp smoke and wool, and maybe the lingering scent of supper from some man's breath or clothing. A guard's life was not glamorous in these hours. It was waiting, watching, standing, stamping cold feet, listening to familiar sounds, and remaining alert in the middle of tedium. The night watch on a peaceful evening was made less of heroics than of patience. You think, perhaps, of what this place would sound like later, when the gate was fully shut. The heavy bar laid into place, the porter checking bolts, the outer doors settling into their frame, voices reduced, footsteps less frequent, the passage becoming emptier, colder, almost echoing in its own abandonment until only the men assigned to it remained. For now, though, the gate is still in service. There is enough evening left for movement. enough life left in the household for arrivals and crossings, enough light for shadows to have edges. Now, the darker tunnel ahead begins to open. The inner end of the passage is not bright, but it is wider in feeling because it leads into space rather than toward another barrier. A little more light reaches in from the bailey beyond. Not strong light, just the reflected presence of it, the glow of some torch in the yard, firelight from a nearby service building, the suggestion of open air after the compressed stone around you. You begin to hear more of the inner sounds too. A bucket set down, hooves shifting, a dog moving across hard ground, a low human laugh, short and tired. The castle is waiting on the other side of the arch, not as an abstraction now, but as a working household. Before you pass out from under the gatehouse, you glance once more to the side and upward. The guard's face is mostly shadow. The lantern flame moves slightly in its iron frame. Above, the hidden chambers remain hidden, though the life within them has made itself known enough. The iron fittings on the doors hold dull points of light. The grooves of the portcullis disappear into blackness overhead. Everything here speaks of control. Everything also speaks of repetition. The same checks, the same questions, the same motions of admission and closure. Night after night, year after year. Then you step forward. The close stone throat of the entrance falls behind you, and the space ahead begins to widen into the outer bailey, where the castle's practical life still lingers in the cold evening air, not yet asleep, not yet silent, but steadily folding itself into the night. The space opens all at once. After the compression of the gate passage, the outer bailey feels wider than it would have if you had entered it in daylight, and the first impression is not grandeur, but release. There is sky above you again, though it is darker now, with the last traces of evening almost gone. The air moves more freely here than under the gatehouse arch, carrying with it the mixed smells of the castle's working life. Smoke from hearths, damp earth, trampled straw, horse sweat, wood, old leather, wet timber, and the faint sourness of refuse not yet fully cleared away. Under your feet, the ground is uneven, churned by many feet and hooves, compacted in some places, softer in others, and scattered here and there with rushes, straw, and the ordinary debris of a lived-in place. This is not the polished heart of the castle. It is one of the spaces that make the polished heart possible. By day, the outer bailey might be noisy with movement. Carts entering and leaving, grooms leading horses, servants carrying supplies, craftsmen at work, dogs weaving among legs, messages arriving, barrels unloaded, firewood stacked, orders given and repeated. But at this hour, the energy has altered. It has narrowed. What remains is the evening version of a working yard. Final tasks, quiet voices, practical movement, small acts of closure before sleep. A torch fixed near one wall burns low and unevenly, its light striking out across the dark only a short distance before it breaks apart on corners, timber posts, and the irregular surfaces of the buildings around the yard. Another light spills from an open doorway and lies across the ground in a thin yellow shape, showing for a moment the edge of a bucket, the leg of a stool, and the boots of someone passing inside. Elsewhere, the buildings are mostly dark masses, their purposes suggested by shape and smell more than fully revealed. Sheds, storehouses, stables, workshops, kitchen outbuildings, perhaps a bakehouse, perhaps lodgings for lesser members of the household, perhaps spaces used for storage, for tools, for fuel, for all the countless materials that a fortified household required simply to continue being itself. You pause and let the yard settle around you. A dog crosses at a distance, its body briefly visible where the torchlight touches the ground, then gone again into shadow. It does not bark now. It has already done its barking, already announced the latest arrivals, and now moves with the self-importance of a creature who knows the place well and expects to be obeyed by no one, yet respected by all. Somewhere to your left comes the soft knock of wood against wood, then a muttered voice, perhaps a man stacking or securing something before the night deepens further. In another direction, you hear the rustle and shifting breath of horses from a stable block, followed by the brief metallic sound of a ring or chain moving against timber. This is the sound of a place not sleeping, but settling. That difference matters. A medieval castle at night did not transform suddenly from noise into silence. It moved through stages. Supper finished in one place, while cleaning continued in another. A child might already be asleep while a cook was still washing pots. A lord might have withdrawn from the hall while the guard at the gate remained fully alert. The household folded inward unevenly, by rank, by duty, by necessity. And the outer bailey was one of the places where that unevenness could still be felt long after the most public parts of the day were done. The ground itself tells you much about the life of the yard. A castle's working spaces were rarely neat in the modern sense. However disciplined the household might be, however well managed its stores, however carefully its stewards counted grain, ale, cloth, wax, salt, meat, and fodder, the practical areas of a stronghold remained intimate with mud and mess. Animals lived nearby. Water was carried and spilled. Ash was moved. Wood was split. Straw was spread and gathered. Rain found its own ways through every imperfection in paving and drainage. The result was a place of use rather than display. And at night, that truth becomes even clearer, because darkness removes the temptation to romanticize detail. You sense the yard first through footing and smell, through the sound of movement and the quality of air. A servant emerges from one doorway with a bundle in his arms, crosses the torchlit patch without looking around, and disappears into another building. There is no drama in it, only tired purpose. A little later, another figure passes carrying a pail that knocks gently against his leg at each step. Somewhere behind a wall, someone laughs once, very softly, then coughs. A door opens, releasing for a moment warmer air and the smell of hay and bodies, then closes again, and the yard returns to its cooler balance of damp and smoke. If the castle from the outside seemed like a single object, the bailey now reveals it as a cluster of dependencies. No noble household lived on walls and tower rooms alone. The outer spaces carried the burden of logistics. Food had to enter. Fuel had to be stored. Tools had to be kept somewhere. Animals had to be housed. Water had to be moved. Refuse had to go out, even if not always efficiently. The elegance of the hall, the privacy of the chamber, the dignity of the chapel, all rested on a less elegant world of carrying, scrubbing, mending, feeding, cleaning, and keeping watch. You feel this truth especially at night, when the last of those tasks still flickers visibly in the gloom. To one side, near the darker line of a wall, you notice a stack of firewood under a rough shelter, each piece cut and gathered at some earlier hour by hands already tired, then and tired still. Near it are barrels, perhaps for ale or grain, their rounded sides catching almost no light except along the narrowest edge. A handcart stands idle, one wheel sunk slightly deeper into the earth than the other. Beside a low building lies a pile of straw or sweepings waiting to be removed or spread elsewhere. Nothing here is arranged for your admiration. It exists because the castle cannot function without it. And yet there is a kind of quiet beauty in such usefulness. The torchlight on damp timber, the slow vapor of an animal's breath in the cold, the simple geometry of barrels, beams, walls, and roof lines under a deepening sky, the sense that every object has been touched by work and fitted into routine. Medieval life, even at its most hierarchical, depended upon this dense web of repeated actions. The outer bailey is where many of them briefly become visible before the night hides them again. You begin to walk slowly across the yard. The route is not marked for you, but it has been marked by use. Certain ways of moving are obvious even in dim light. Paths worn harder through the ground. Doorways more often used. Spaces where the household's traffic has made its habits plain over the years. Near one building, the earth is drier under an overhang, and there the footprints of the day have left a rough, layered pattern. Near another, the ground remains softer, and your step sinks slightly. The castle may seem all stone from a distance, but inside its walls, much of life is negotiated through mud, timber, straw, and simple adjustment. A stable hand, or someone much like one, stands in the half-dark near a doorway, rubbing something down with methodical strokes. The object is not clear at first, then resolves itself as part of a horse's harness or saddle. He works by habit more than by sight now. He does not need bright light for this. His hands know the leather. His body knows the sequence. One more task before he can rest. Or perhaps before he can sleep on straw, not far from the very tack he is now putting in order. Around him, the smell of horse and leather gathers thickly in the air. A warm smell, almost comforting against the stone chill of the evening. In another corner of the yard, a few chickens, disturbed late, mutter and resettle somewhere unseen. A dog lifts its head again. A horse stamps once. Somewhere water is poured out. Somewhere a latch is drawn. These are not important sounds individually, yet together they form the emotional truth of the place. A castle at night is not defined only by its architecture, nor even by the social ranks contained within it. It is defined by transitions, from labor to rest, from openness to enclosure, from public ceremony to private exhaustion. The outer bailey is one of the best places to feel that transition because it is where work lingers longest in the air. You look upward. Above the roofs of the lower buildings, the higher structures of the castle still rise, tower, parapet, the darker bulk of upper walls. Against the night sky, they seem almost serene, but down here the mood is more intimate and practical. That contrast is part of the castle's reality. Its great heights symbolize authority, but its lower yards reveal the cost of maintaining that authority. Firewood must be cut, horses must be fed, stores must be kept dry, messages must be received. Sweeping, lifting, hauling, washing, scraping, and mending must continue, whether or not anyone in the Lord's chamber sees them. A small gust of wind moves across the bailey, touching the torch flame and carrying with it a stronger drift of kitchen smoke from elsewhere within the precinct. For a moment you also catch the scent of something cooked long enough ago to be fading now into the general air: meat, onions, bread, grease, perhaps ale. Supper is over in the hall, or nearly so, but the memory of it remains here in smell. That too is medieval life. Odors travel where rank does not. The noble table and the servant's labor meet again in the drifting aftermath of food. You slow near the middle of the yard and listen. From behind one wall comes the unmistakable sound of horses shifting in their stalls. A close living sound, soft but heavy, accompanied by the brushing rasp of hay and the small clink of tethering hardware. That is where warmth lies. Real warmth, not from a hearth, but from large bodies gathered in enclosure. In a cold season, the stable would be one of the more physically comforting spaces in the outer works, though not one any noble would romanticize. For the workers who spent their hours there, however, its smells and sounds were the sounds of continuity. Horses at rest meant the day's journeys were done. Saddles could be hung, hooves checked, feed measured. For a few hours at least, the great animals and the people who cared for them could share the same pause in the rhythm of duty. Elsewhere, perhaps beyond another low building, the service areas continue their quieter motions. Someone still has to carry scraps. Someone still has to bank a fire. Someone still has to check a store, latch a door, hang a tool, cover a barrel, draw one more bucket, or answer one more instruction before the household finally settles into its layered sleep. This is why the outer bailey matters so much in understanding medieval nights. It shows that even in a fortified residence, peace was built from maintenance. A castle was not a magical shell that kept danger out by existing. It had to be staffed, supplied, observed, cleaned, repaired, and continuously worked. At night, those obligations did not disappear. They simply reduced to the most necessary forms. A little farther ahead, near the stable entrance, one lantern hangs from a peg, its light smaller and steadier than the torch behind you. It burns in a pocket of relative calm, revealing a section of wall, a post, the edge of an open doorway, and the drifting breath of an animal just within. The contrast draws you naturally toward it. After the exposed road, the bridge, the scrutiny of the gatehouse, and the practical dimness of the yard, this warmer pool of light promises the next stage of the night's journey. Behind you, the gatehouse keeps its watch. Around you, the outer bailey continues its final labors in murmurs, footsteps, and brief moving shadows. Ahead, the stable waits, filled with hay, leather, warmth, and the slow breathing of animals bedding down for the night. You turn toward it and walk on. The stable receives you before you fully enter it. Even at the doorway, the air changes. Outside in the bailey, the night had a damp openness to it, a mixture of smoke, mud, and cooling stone. Here, just within the timbered entrance, the air is heavier and warmer, full of hay, leather, horse sweat, old straw, and the deep animal breath of creatures at rest. It is not a clean smell in the modern sense, but it is rich and alive, and after the chill of the yard, it carries an immediate bodily comfort. The stable is one of those medieval spaces where warmth is made not by fire alone, but by life itself. You step inside slowly. The lantern hanging near the entrance gives only a limited circle of light, but your eyes adjust quickly to the softer interior dark. Timber beams rise overhead, blackened in places by age and smoke. The floor beneath you is layered with straw, packed earth, and the marks of many hooves. Along either side of the stable, the horses stand or settle in their stalls, large forms emerging gradually from shadow as your sight learns the room. One lowers its head into hay. Another turns slightly and shifts its weight with a soft thud. A third flicks an ear toward you, exhales, and returns to its quiet stillness. The sounds here are among the most soothing in the castle. A slow breath, the rustle of hay being drawn and chewed, the gentle scrape of hoof against timber or ground, a halter ring moving softly, a tail brushing wood, the tiny, almost sleepy movement of leather settling where tack has just been hung. Unlike the sharper sounds of the gatehouse or the open yard, these remain close to the body. They do not travel far. They gather in the warmth of the room and seem to rest there, like the heat itself. You pause beside the doorway and let the stable speak in its own way. Horses were precious in the medieval world, valuable not only for war, though that mattered greatly in noble households, but for travel, message carrying, status, transport, and the daily functioning of an estate. A castle stable was not an incidental outbuilding. It was a place of investment, discipline, and constant labor. To keep horses well required grooming, feeding, cleaning, checking hooves, managing tack, watching for injury, and knowing each animal's habits. The evening stable, then, was never simply a shelter for beasts. It was a workplace winding down, a place where care continued after public life had ended. A groom stands a little way down the row, half lit by the lantern glow and half swallowed by shadow, his hands moving with the steady familiarity of long repetition. He is rubbing down a horse's flank with a cloth or handful of straw, not hurriedly, not lazily, but with the even patience of someone who has done this thousands of times and knows that the animal's comfort now will matter tomorrow. The horse stands quietly for him, one hind leg bent in rest, the great body relaxed in trust or simple fatigue. There is no conversation between them, only the faint murmur of a human voice now and then, low and habitual. A word, a breath. The kind of sound made less to communicate information than to confirm presence. This kind of relationship belonged to the hidden infrastructure of castle life. Lords might be remembered by name, battles by date, buildings by style, but much of the real continuity of a household depended on people like this groom, whose labor sat below ceremony and yet made ceremony possible. Without him, or others like him, there would be no mounted messenger arriving promptly, no lord departing in dignity, no horse ready for hunting, escort, patrol, or journey. The stable at night reveals how much of noble life rested on hands that smelled of hay and leather rather than wax and parchment. You walk farther in. As you move along the central passage, one horse turns its head toward you. The lantern picks out the curve of its neck, the dark shine of an eye, the faint whiteness at the edge of the muzzle where breath gathers in the cooler interior air. Another horse snorts very softly, then settles again. Somewhere farther back, almost hidden in the dimness, a younger animal paws once at the straw and receives a short, calming sound from the groom, who does not even need to look up to know where the movement came from. The stable is a world of recognition. Each horse knows its stall, its smell, its place in the order of the room. The men who care for them know the sounds that mean rest, irritation, hunger, fatigue, discomfort. In the dark, this knowledge becomes even more important. Medieval nights were lived through familiarity. The body learned what the eyes could not always confirm. A groom could find his way through this space by memory and scent as much as by light. He knew where the tack hung, where the feed bins stood, which latch was loose, which animal would stamp before settling, which one needed watching if the weather had turned cold. To your left, tack hangs from pegs, bridles, straps, perhaps a saddle or two already cleaned and set aside. Even in low light, you can see the use in them. Leather softened by handling, buckles dulled by time, the whole arrangement speaking of constant maintenance. Nothing in a medieval castle remained serviceable by neglect. Every object asked something of someone. The stable merely makes that truth impossible to ignore. The warmth deepens as you move away from the doorway. Not enough to banish the season, whatever it is, but enough to soften the edges of it. You understand now why stable spaces could feel almost comforting to those who worked in them, even though they were rough, dirty, and full of labor. The hay holds warmth. The animals make warmth. The close timbering keeps out some of the wind. For a servant or boy sleeping nearby on straw, this might be one of the least punishing places in the outer works to pass the night. Not luxurious, certainly. Not private. But warmer than a drafty corridor, and less exposed than the yard beyond. Near the far wall, a heap of clean straw waits to be spread. Beside it are tools, fork, bucket, brush, perhaps a small stool. Nothing elaborate. Only the practical inventory of care. A water vessel stands nearby, and you can hear, now and then, the tiny echoing tap of a drop falling where some rim or wood edge has not fully dried. Medieval life was full of such small sounds. In modern memory, we often preserve the large ones, the dramatic ones. But the truth of a place often lives in the almost silent details. The drop of water, the pull of hay, the settling of leather, the breath of an animal in darkness. You rest your hand briefly against one of the stable posts. The timber is rough, solid, slightly worn smooth where hands have often touched it. It carries the faint dryness of wood under the more humid smell of hay and animal heat. Here again, the castle becomes tactile rather than symbolic. Not only wall and tower, but post, beam, rope, trough, hinge, blanket, hoof, straw. To understand what a medieval night was really like, you must come close enough to feel such things. The groom has finished with one horse now and moves to check another. He runs a hand down a foreleg, feeling perhaps for heat or swelling, then bends to inspect the hoof in the lantern light. The motion is efficient, practiced, and slightly weary. He has likely been on his feet since long before the evening meal. Yet this final circuit matters. In a household where horses mean movement and status, neglect tonight becomes trouble tomorrow. The stable does not sleep until he is satisfied. A second figure, younger, perhaps a stable boy, emerges briefly from deeper shadow carrying a small armful of hay. He moves quietly, almost instinctively quiet, as though the stable has taught him a different kind of speech. He tops up a stall, glances toward the older man for approval or instruction, receives none, because none is needed, and retreats again. In that small exchange, hardly more than a movement, the whole chain of medieval labor becomes visible, skill passing downward through example, not theory. Boys learned by doing near men who had done for years. The castle reproduced itself through such habits as much as through inheritance. Above, the beams disappear into darkness. You imagine how this room would feel in deeper winter, with wind worrying at the outer boards, the horses' bodies steaming faintly in the cold, and every warmer breath precious. Or in summer, with the stable more pungent, fuller of flies by day, quieter and thicker by night. Season changed the stable deeply, just as it changed every other part of castle life. Medieval people lived closer to those changes because their architecture never fully sealed them out. Even here, in one of the more sheltered working spaces, weather remained a participant in the room. A horse near you lifts its head and studies you for a moment, then resumes chewing. There is something profoundly calming in that motion. The unhurried certainty of an animal safe in enclosure, doing what it has done every evening of its life. Eat, shift, breathe, rest. Around it the castle may be stratified by rank, but within the stable another order holds sway. Care, routine, feed, enclosure, readiness. That rhythm makes the stable one of the most restful places in the whole night walk. Not because it is quiet in an absolute sense. It is not. It is full of living sound. But because those sounds are repetitive, low, bodily and without urgency. They reassure rather than demand. They tell you that for now the day's journeys are over. The harness is hung, the gate is watched, and the household has entered the slower part of its breathing. You turn slightly and look back toward the doorway. Beyond it, the bailey waits in cooler darkness, still touched by the final motions of labor. But here inside the stable, the rhythm is already more inward. The horses are bedding down. The last checks are being made. The lantern burns steadily. Hay rustles. Leather hangs. Warmth gathers close to wood. And somewhere beyond this room, other spaces of the castle continue their own evening transitions. The kitchens still hold heat. Pots are still being scrubbed. Ash is still being moved. Bread rooms and buttery spaces are being shut and counted. In the hall, perhaps, the high table has emptied, and the last of the trenchers are being cleared. The night has not fully settled there yet. You leave the stable slowly, carrying its warmth with you for a moment as you step back into the cooler air of the bailey. Ahead, the smell of smoke strengthens, and from deeper within the castle precinct comes the lingering promise of hot stone, banked fires, and the long labor of the kitchens after supper. You turn toward that glow and continue on. And so, as the first pale hint of morning begins to gather beyond the walls, you leave the castle to its final quiet moments before the day begins again. Behind you remain the fading embers, the sleeping chambers, the watchful walls, the stables warm with animal breath, and the long stone passages that held the night so closely. What nights were really like in an English medieval castle was not endless drama nor perfect silence, but something far more human, darker, colder, noisier, and more crowded than we often imagine, yet also ordered by habit, softened by firelight, and made bearable by routine. It was a world of watchmen and servants, of prayer and fatigue, of straw, smoke, timber, and stone, where every soul, from lord to stable boy, met the darkness in a different way. And for a few brief hours, before the bell, before the footsteps, before the hearths were stirred back to life, the whole castle rested beneath the fading stars, suspended between one long day and the next.